In this video, we are going to be talking about aquatic biomes. We have two major classifications of aquatic biomes. We have freshwater and we have marine. Starting off with freshwater. The three major types of freshwater biomes we have are rivers and streams, lakes and ponds, and freshwater wetlands. We'll go into more detail about each. Well, there is no delineation between rivers and streams as to what dictates the size of a river or the size of a stream isn't there. Streams are generally narrower than rivers, and streams generally carry less water than rivers. So rivers will be wider and carry more water, and streams will be smaller, narrower, and carry less water. But again, there is no delineation between a river and a stream. We generally have areas of rivers and streams that are fast-flowing or slow-flowing. Fast-flowing areas of rivers and streams, because the water is moving, plants have a hard time taking root, so generally you're not going to have any plants and no algae either. Because of this, you're not going to have nutrients in the water from plants and algae, so the nutrients are going to be coming from leaf drop from the plants that are on the banks of the rivers and streams. The nutrients from this leaf drop is going to be feeding insect larvae and small crustaceans that can live in the fast-flowing area. These insects and crustaceans will then be prey for fish like trout and salmon. In many areas of our fast-flowing rivers and streams, we might have areas of rapids. In the areas of rapids, we're going to have aeration of the water. With the aeration of the water, you're going to have an increased in dissolved oxygen. So the amount of oxygen that's dissolved within the water in this area is going to be higher. This will then support trout and salmon. Now looking at slow-flowing areas of rivers and streams, because the water is not moving very fast, that allows for plants to take root. So in this area, we will have plants and algae, which are going to be providing the nutrients in this area. Because we don't have the rapids and the aeration, we're going to have a lower dissolved oxygen. So things like trout and salmon might not necessarily be able to live in a slow-flowing area of the river. It's going to support organisms that have a higher tolerance to lower dissolved oxygen, such as catfish. Where rivers and streams are moving freshwater that originate from underground springs or from runoff from rain or snowmelt, our stationary freshwater is lakes and ponds. And just like our rivers and streams, there is no delineation between a lake and a pond. Generally, lakes are larger and ponds are smaller. We're going to take a look at the different regions of a lake or a pond. The first zone we're going to look at is the littoral zone. The littoral zone is categorized by emerging plants and algae. This is the edge of the pond that meets the land. This area here is the littoral zone. Then we have the limnetic zone. This is the area that has sunshine reaching. So it is open water where the sunshine can reach. In deeper lakes and ponds, you might have a profundal zone. The profundal zone is where light does not reach. And lastly, we have the benthic zone. The benthic zone is essentially the muddy bottom of the pond or lake. We can categorize lakes and ponds by the fertility level. We have oligotrophic lakes and ponds. These are generally low fertility, very little phytoplankton, so we don't have a lot of photosynthesis going on. And the reason why we have very little phytoplankton is because there is low nutrients. There is very little phytoplankton because there are low nutrients, and because we have low amounts of phytoplankton and low amounts of nutrients, the water tends to be clear. In the middle, we have mesotrophic, and on the other end of the spectrum, we have eutrophic. Eutrophic has high fertility. There is lots of algae. Then we have eutrophic. On the other end of the spectrum, we have eutrophic lakes. Eutrophic lakes tend to be high in fertility, have lots of algae because there's a lot of nutrients, and because of the large amounts of nutrients and algae, the water tends to be turbid or cloudy. The large amounts of nutrients for eutrophic lakes often come from the large amount of nutrients in a eutrophic lake tend to come from human input. Wetlands support many different types of vegetation and are very important biomes on the planet. Wetlands are a very productive biome and provide a lot of services for humans. A few of the services that wetlands provide are reducing flooding. Wetlands reduce flooding by slowly allowing the rainwater to seep into the groundwater instead of moving into areas that humans have developed. Wetlands filter pollutants. As the wetland is holding on to some of this water and allowing it to seep into the groundwater, the soil is going to be filtering a lot of the pollutants out before the water gets into the groundwater. Many birds rely on wetlands for either migration or breeding. 1/3 of the endangered species of birds rely on wetlands at some point in their life. And just as a note, worldwide, about half of the world's wetlands have been destroyed or drained for agriculture or to deter pests such as mosquitoes. We have 3 main types of wetlands: swamps, marshes, and bogs. Swamps have emerging trees. Marshes are mostly non-woody plants, such as cattails and sedges. And bogs tend to be quite acidic and have plants such as sphagnum moss and spruce trees. Now moving on to marine biomes. Marine biomes are classified by salty water. Estuaries and salt marshes are found along coastlines. Estuaries are where fresh water and salt water will come to mix. So maybe a river comes to the ocean, and that area where the ocean water and the fresh water are mixing is an estuary. And salt marshes are just like freshwater marshes and where they have a lot of non-woody plants, and these non-woody plants do need to be salt tolerant. Estuaries and salt marshes are highly productive biomes. Estuaries are productive because the rivers are carrying a lot of nutrients into this area. A lot of the plants that are in estuaries help filter the water as well. Both of these areas are in quite danger as we, as humans, tend to drain or redirect estuaries and salt marshes. Salt marshes do tend to have a little bit of a stink because there's a lot of anaerobic respiration going on, so there is a little bit of an unpleasant smell. So a lot of times these areas are drained. Canals have been built to redirect the water so that way it becomes a little less smelly for the people that live in these regions. Also, in saltwater marshes, the types of grasses that are found here were once widely used in agriculture, but the saltwater marshes depend on the cycle of the grasses living and then dying and decaying and becoming part of that kind of spongy salt marsh land that's there. And because we are taking away these grasses, the marsh isn't able to build up like it should naturally and has put a lot of the species in danger. We have mangrove swamps. Mangrove swamps are found in tropical or subtropical regions. And just as freshwater swamps, we do have emergent trees. One of the main trees would be the mangrove tree. And the mangrove tree is highly salt tolerant and also can tolerate being partially submerged and less submerged over time. So there has a very large root system that allows it to be able to withstand the tides of this area. Worldwide, about 1/3 of the mangrove swamps have been disturbed and destroyed. We have the intertidal zone. The intertidal zone is the area between high and low tide. Organisms that live in this area do need to be able to withstand being submerged and being completely dry. So during high tide, they're going to be completely submerged underwater. And then during low tide, they're going to be without the water cover. So they have to be able to withstand the constant going in and out of being able to live in water, submerged, or out of water, unsubmerged. Many of these organisms also do need a way to have a hold onto the ground and a way to hold on because of the waves and the water pulling back and forth. So you have mussels that have the ability to stick to the rocks. They have special organs to help them do that. So that way they can withstand the waves and the pulling back and forth of the tide. There are many threats to the intertidal zone, such as pollution, trash, chemicals, and oil spills. Then we have coral reefs. Coral reefs are in warm, shallow waters just beyond the shoreline. Living in coral reefs is coral. Coral is an animal that has a calcium exoskeleton. When you think of coral, you think of the really pretty, different colors. They very much look like they could be plants, but they are animals. They are little microorganism. They are little organisms living inside this calcium exoskeleton. And living on the exoskeleton are algae. The algae and the coral have a symbiotic relationship. The algae is living on the outside of the coral and provides the coral with different sugars, and then the coral provides the algae with carbon dioxide. As the temperature and the pH of the ocean has been changing, this has been making it more difficult for the algae that live on the outside of coral to survive. As the algae can no longer survive in the range of pH or temperature of the water, the algae has been dying. And because of this, the colors on the outside of the coral are no longer there because the color of the coral comes from these algae. And then the coral just looks white. So this is called coral bleaching. Coral bleaching is essentially the death of the algae living on the outside of the coral. Because this algae is no longer living, there's no longer that symbiotic relationship, making the coral struggle to survive, causing the coral to also not survive. And lastly, we have the open ocean. The open ocean is essentially the deep ocean. In the open ocean, we don't have a lot of plant material as the water is too deep to support plant life. Let's take a look at the anatomy of the open ocean. Just like we had in our lakes, the bottom is the benthic region. And then we have two layers of ocean. The top layer is the photic region. And this is the area of the ocean that receives sunlight. And since we receive sunlight in this area, there's a lot of algae and phytoplankton that can do photosynthesis in this area because this is where sunshine can reach. We get to a point where sunshine can no longer reach. This is the aphotic region. So because we have no sunshine, we cannot have photosynthesis. So in this region, we have organisms that do chemosynthesis. They're using some sort of chemical, mostly coming from the seafloor vents, to do their photosynthesis. So instead of using light, they're using a chemical to produce their sugars. In the open ocean is where most of our oxygen on the planet comes from because there is so much open ocean and there's a lot of phytoplankton that live in this open ocean collecting sunshine and doing photosynthesis. This is where most of our oxygen comes from. And that is Aquatic Biomes. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.